Tonight, shock election in the UK, the Democratic proxy war in Virginia, and legal interracial marriage 50 years later. A second federal appeals court has upheld the block on President Trump's revised travel ban. In yet another legal defeat for the executive order, the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit said the order discriminates against people based on their nationality, and that, quote, immigration, even for the president, is not a one-person show. The issue is already headed to the Supreme Court because the administration has asked for review of a similar ruling in the Fourth Circuit. The Maryland and District of Columbia Attorneys General are suing President Trump, alleging his continued connection to his businesses violate the Constitution's anti-corruption provisions.
He doesn't appear to understand or care about these violations of the Constitution that he swore to uphold and protect.
Both attorneys general are Democrats. That, plus the desire to unearth Trump's tax returns in the process, could make the case easy to dismiss as a partisan witch hunt. D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine tried to counter that argument today.
If Mark Cuban or Zuckerberg from Facebook run for president in 2020 and get elected, and they decide to continue their business enterprises, and their business enterprises are getting money from foreign governments, we'll sue them too.
Republican Congressman Greg Gianforte pled guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge for body-slamming Guardian reporter Ben Jacobs the day before the election for Montana's House seat.
I'm sick and tired of you guys. The last time that came here, you did the same thing.
Gianforte's campaign initially blamed Jacobs, but he's since apologized and also settled with Jacobs to avoid a separate civil suit. The judge sentenced Gianforte to 40 hours of community service, 20 hours of anger management, and a $385 fine, but no jail time. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny will be jailed for 30 days after he was arrested at home before an anti-corruption rally. Police claimed the protests Navalny planned in Moscow were illegal because the location was changed at the last minute. But Navalny, who's trying to run against Vladimir Putin in next year's presidential election, said the Kremlin was interfering and trying to undermine the demonstrations. Thousands showed up at sister protests across the country, and hundreds have been detained. Government forces celebrated Independence Day in the Philippines as the United States joined the fight against militants aligned with the Islamic State in Marawi. The southern island of Mindanao is still under martial law. The Pentagon says American forces are just providing security assistance and training.
I never approach any American to say that tumulong kayo.
Prime Minister Theresa May is clinging to power in the UK 4 days after an election that was a disaster for the Tories. May addressed party members today in a closed-door meeting, reportedly telling them, quote, I got us into this mess, and I'll get us out of it. It's a mess she should have seen coming. A year ago, another surprise election rocked Britain, as voters decided last June to leave the EU. Prime Minister David Cameron, a Remainer, stepped down, giving way to his Home Secretary, Theresa May. That May was never chosen in a general election hardly seemed to matter, because the opposition party, Labour, was in such disarray after the Brexit vote. Standard-bearer Jeremy Corbyn seemed to be about to lose his leadership position entirely. But Corbyn had a plan: shift the party back toward its socialist roots with more money for the government-run National Health Service and more support for students, including scrapping university tuition. Nervous centrists in the party leaked his policy manifesto a week early, hoping that Labour's rank and file would reject it. Instead, they embraced it.
And I'm very proud of the results that are coming in all over the country tonight of people voting for hope for the future.
May will remain Prime Minister for now.
What the country needs more than ever is certainty.
But nobody, not even within her own party, expects her to fight the next election, which could come as early as October. And when it does happen, candidates will have to navigate a political landscape far different from the one they thought they knew.
The
Member of Parliament for Canterbury, Rosie Duffield!
The city of Canterbury is the definition of a Conservative stronghold. Voters here have sent Tories to Parliament for the last 100 years. But not this year. Rosie Duffield is Canterbury's first ever Labour MP.
Thank you for letting me say a few words. It's all a bit of a shock, the fact that I'm your new MP, but I'm here representing...
In the 2015 general election, the Tory candidate, a 30-year incumbent, won again by almost 10,000 votes. Last week, Duffield beat him by 187.
Why do you think that you managed to break that trend of blue here in Canterbury?
I think it was young people, older people who are fed up with the NHS being sold down the river and slices of it chucked up. Pensions, social care. Labour has a new forward-thinking policy on all of those issues.
Do you think Canterbury reflected what happens in the rest of the country?
I think it did. I think we want a change. We didn't want Theresa May pushing hard Brexit. We didn't want us selling our public services short.
This year's Pride Parade was Duffield's first public appearance as MP. The young people in attendance were a big reason for her win. There are 40,000 students in the city, and in this year's election there were about 8,000 new voters. Many of them, including some of these students at Canterbury Christ Church University, voted for the first time.
I mean, you were all students in 2015 as well, weren't you? Yeah. So is there a marked difference between 2015 and now?
Usually. Massive. I cannot even remember people talking about elections in 2015.
It was a very quiet election, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
Very quiet.
It's more buzz about this election than it was even around the referendum.
What is it that has got you guys out and motivated and other young people really into this election?
I think there's a number of reasons. I think number one is Corbyn, and the fact that he's actually put a manifesto together that actually looks at young people. I think for so many years you've had parties that don't even focus on young people, and I think the second reason as well is Brexit. No one expected us to leave the EU, so young people again were quite apathetic towards it, and they didn't get involved, whereas now they've realised that they have to get involved to actually make those changes.
The message they sent has the Conservative Party searching for answers. The Tories are still in power, but with a drastically weakened mandate and an uncertain path forward. Simon Cook is a Conservative leader in Canterbury.
The key vote changer was that the youth vote came out and it voted. The reason pensioners get a great deal from the government is because pensioners vote. The reason young people don't get a good deal from any government is that young people don't vote. Now here we've had the Labour Party turn that upside down, aim an arrow straight at that age group, made policy for them, and they've gone, thank you very much, and we'll reward you for that.
But
and the Conservatives,
students alone aren't going to...
It's not the only factor. There are lots of other bits and pieces.
What are the other things?
Well, I think to be absolutely honest, looking at it in the cold light of day, the Conservative Party didn't fight a very good campaign. I don't think the manifesto was up to snuff. I don't think it had anything in it for young people in particular. It didn't have much in it for anybody. It was unrelenting austerity. And you've got to have a message of hope.
In Canterbury, Labour also got support from voters that previously backed other smaller parties, like the Liberal Democrats and the UK Independence Party. Helen and her mother Brenda are both first-time Labour voters.
This isn't Labour heartland. This isn't where Labour voters traditionally are from. I think Brexit is really the main thing that has changed the two different results, because Brexit made everybody realise that actually 50% kind of Canterbury is kind of liberal. If we don't pull ourselves together, then this will happen again.
What about your generation? What are the biggest issue for people like yourself?
I guess in the long term you're thinking of, I might be fit and healthy now, but what about when I'm not so fit and healthy? It's a case of I've paid my insurance, I've paid my taxes, and now I've still got to pay again. I'm going to have to sell my property so I can be looked after.
But in 2015, you didn't vote for the Labour Party, but those same issues were around then. Why switch from the Liberal Democrats to Labour this time round?
To try and get the Conservatives out. I knew there was this big Labour campaign going on, and I thought, if enough people do it, and I can be one of those that do it, my vote might count in changing Canterbury.
Missouri's Senate met today as part of a special session called by Governor Eric Greitens to consider further regulations against abortion providers, such as annual inspections and emergency medical protocols. State legislators across the country have placed more than 300 restrictions on abortion providers over the last decade. Now it's harder than ever to keep a clinic open. And in 7 states, including Missouri, there's only one abortion provider left.
We're resolute that we must stay open, because if we're not there, there is no one to take care of the women in our state and in our community.
We operated as a doctor's office until Governor Bevins decided that we would need, since we did abortions, we would need an abortion license. So then we applied for a license, and then they didn't want to give us a license. They sort of controlled both ends of that situation.
To them, it's not even about practicality. It's about their philosophical opposition to abortion.
In North Dakota, Jane Bovard opened the first abortion clinic, and she had protesters at her home. She was threatened. She's calling 911 while her husband's loading the shotgun. She put up with a lot.
When we moved out of our old facility, it was taken over by the Alpha Center, which is a right-wing crisis pregnancy center. And I used to get phone calls from women that had thought they were going to Planned Parenthood and mistakenly gone to the Alpha Center.
Emergent care is a family practice urgent care facility. It is not an abortion clinic. And I think that's an important point because we feel that it's just a part of routine health care.
I think it's crucial that we remain here for women. They have nowhere else to go. They can go to neighboring states, but why should they have to? Each state should be able to provide this service for women.
Tomorrow, Virginia holds its primary elections for governor. And it's another opportunity for Democrats to show that they've regained momentum after last November's crushing defeat. And that means fighting the latest battle in a long-running war about the party's future. Alexandra Jaffe has more.
Ralph Northam's the Virginia lieutenant governor. He's an establishment Democrat endorsed by just about every major party figure in the state. Northam frames himself as a pragmatic consensus builder.
What do you see as the differences in the race?
I've been in Richmond for 10 years. I know how to get things done.
He's your Hillary Clinton. Tom Perriello's a former congressman and Obama administration official. The upstart wasn't supposed to be a factor at all, but now the polls are close. Sounds familiar, right? Here's Perriello during a midnight campaign stop at a college bar.
The kind of approach that Dr. Northam and others take really kind of aged out a generation ago.
He's your Bernie Sanders. Perriello's even been endorsed by the Vermont senator.
Tom's victory will be a signal all across this country.
Like Sanders, Perriello faces an uphill fight to win. So in the final weekend of campaigning, he spends his Friday at a metro stop in Ballston at 8 a.m.
So have you voted yet?
I haven't voted yet.
At 8 p.m. at an oyster roast in Cape Charles.
Thank you very much for letting me crash the party.
And at a truck stop in Ashland at 2 in the morning.
How are you doing? Good to see you. How's business tonight?
But if this is Clinton versus Sanders 2.0, Perriello's trying to make some improvements on the original.
The national narrative around this race is that you're facing off in a Bernie versus Hillary rematch with Northam. What do you make of that? Do you think that that's a fair comparison?
Well, we like to think of ourselves as kind of the greatest hits album, but a remix.
That includes trying to win over African Americans in a way that Sanders couldn't. In Virginia, they could make up 20% of the primary electorate. That has Perriello awkwardly barnstorming barbershops.
What do you think we should be doing here to reach voters in the last 4 days?
And nodding at the state's history of racial injustice.
Virginia is the birthplace of American democracy and the birthplace of American slavery. So we've always been at the forefront of conversations about justice and liberty, but we've unfortunately also been at the forefront in the worst sense of America's past.
Neither candidate is a perfect progressive. Perriello was endorsed by the NRA during his term in Congress. Northam voted for George W. Bush twice. So they're trying to draw a contrast on one major motivator in the race, Donald Trump. The president's approval rating in Virginia is at just 36%. and opposition to him is driving up Democratic enthusiasm here.
I like Ralph Northam. He seems very, very down to earth, and his issues are basically anti-Trump, so I'm kind of on board because of that.
It sounds like Donald Trump is a big issue for you in this race.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
He's a jackass.
It's also driving both candidates in a race to the left over who can be more anti-Trump.
Donald Trump's abuse of power is real.
I think he's a narcissistic maniac.
Whoever wins is likely to face Republican Ed Gillespie, a seasoned Politico who knows how to compete. Normally, that would force the Democrats to stake out moderate positions in the primary. But this time, with Trump so unpopular here, they're willing to take the chance.
Today, Neil Gorsuch, the newest justice on the Supreme Court, wrote his first opinion on a pretty boring case about debt collection. He got unanimous support from the divided bench, but it was a gimme. It's part of a long-held initiation ritual on the Supreme Court to assign an incoming justice an uncontroversial decision that all the other judges agree on. And the freshman can expect a bit more hazing. He'll have to be the gopher at all the court's private meetings and be assigned to the SCOTUS cafeteria committee. He could exert some influence there, though. Elena Kagan, the last justice to work in the CAF, got a frozen yogurt machine installed. Gorsuch's culinary biases aren't yet clear, but his rookie decision on debt collection today showed his distaste for judicial activism, stating, "These are matters for Congress, not this court, to resolve."
I didn't realize how bad it was until we got married.
50 years ago today, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Richard and Mildred Loving, granting them, and anyone, the right to marry a spouse of a different race. It was a historic moment for civil rights in America, but also a very personal one. We asked couples to mark the anniversary by explaining what the Loving decision means to them and their families.
These were simple country people who were not activists. They were not civil rights people. They were in love.
You know, we're talking about a time when 40 states in America would regard us as criminals. Okay, that's no longer the case.
There's actually one simple issue, and the issue is, may a state proscribe a marriage between two adult consenting individuals because of their race?
My parents were completely cool with it. They met Errol quite early on, I think a year after, not even a year after we met.
I'd seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, so of course there was a concern for me.
We were all slightly naively, I think, in my family, not fully tuned in to the racial divide in America.
Vaughn has never been to my parents' home, and he's not welcome there. For a little while, I read the Riot Act, not just by my parents. My parents didn't know how to deal with it, but my brothers were pretty upset, and we're still finding our way. My parents met Vaughn in May of last year. They came to New York.
One time, Chris came to me as we were at a family event, and even though he's coming from a very liberal, very progressive, very anti-racist family, that when they see me, they see a Black woman, and that's always in the interactions that I have with his family.
I notice color. I'm not colorblind. It's not that white folks aren't white folks and black folks aren't black folks, but this particular white folk is my soulmate and my best friend.
There's never a time when we are in public when I'm not aware that we're an interracial couple. When we walk into a room, people take notice, okay? Very early on, Black women made it absolutely clear that this was not cool.
I had asked Janet to marry me on several occasions, and she refused. And she refused because I was serving in the Senate. And she was afraid that our being married would impede or somehow impair my reelection.
If they had been racist and held that against him, I would never have forgiven myself, because I could go on loving him without a marriage certificate.
The state is ignoring a very important point.
And that is the right of Richard and Mildred Loving to wake up in the morning or to go to sleep at night, knowing that the sheriff will not be knocking on their door or shining a light in their face in the privacy of their bedroom.
Boy, we're really getting personal here. Folks in her family praying that we don't get pregnant. And that's happening. That was told to Gail. And I can't fathom that.
I think any preconceptions that you're going to have, that interracial marriages for some eugenic reason don't work, just are shattered as soon as you see a healthy child. You can't look at those boys playing. They're healthy, they're loud, they're skin knees, they're perfect.
For me, my concern was that they would be prey to certain social definitions of who they're supposed to be. I wanted their cultural horizons and their formation of their own identities to be as open as possible.
My daughter referred to herself as orange when she was little. That was her term. So we did that.
Yeah.
You know?
She once drew a picture of herself that was literally half white and half black. That was a little spooky.
No one can articulate it better than Richard Loving when he said to me, Mr. Cohen, tell the court I love my wife, and it is just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia.
I'm the same age as Emmett Till. So I was 14 when I realized what white people could do to black people in this country and get away with it. So when this white boy at Butler University asked me to date him, I said, no, I don't date white boys. However, if I had continued with that attitude, I would have missed Bill.
Being married to John keeps me accountable. Like, I can never do they. I can't do they. They are. They, because I'm waking up to this guy, my husband.
Intermarriage is intensifying throughout the country. So that demographic fact gives us a certain kind of legitimacy. Not only us, but our children. So we actually feel that we've been pioneers.
I think that marrying who you want to is a right that no man should have anything to do with. It's a God-given right, I think.
That's Vice News Tonight for Monday, June 12th.